The Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Blockchain Super Conference is coming to Dallas, Texas, February 16, 17, and 18 in 2018. If you know of a better way to get the latest insider knowledge about crypto, to hear directly from the top minds in this field, to interact personally with 800 fellow crypto lovers, hodlers, investors, miners, traders, developers, and founders, then I'd like to hear about it. If you don't, then you don't want to miss out. Register today for the Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Blockchain Super Conference. Go to bitcoinsuperconference.com and register today as a super early bird to get the lowest rates on tickets and hotel rooms. That's bitcoinsuperconference.com.
Welcome to Almost Here, Round the Corner Future Technology podcast with Richard Jacobs. Future technologies poised to transform our lives for better or worse are the focus of this podcast. Almost here means these technologies are now here and starting to be used, or just around the corner, from Bitcoin to artificial intelligence, 3D printing, blockchain, virtual reality, and more.
Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with Future Tech Podcast. I have two guests, Alex Miller and Karl Kreder, co-founders of Grid Plus. How you guys doing?
Doing pretty well. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah, no problem. I know Karl's traveling in Europe, and you guys are out and about, promoting and working on things. Tell listeners the basics. What's Grid Plus about?
I guess I'll take that one. So Grid Plus is basically bringing blockchain to electricity markets to try to make them more efficient, to lower costs, and to help create sort of the transactional infrastructure needed to efficiently bring on more renewable energy and distributed energy resources to the grid in the future.
Yeah, I remember, now it's probably like 12 years ago with Enron in the U.S., they were messing around with the cost of energy, and they drove up prices like crazy. And, I would hope that the market's become a lot more efficient since then, and that you guys are going to play a big role in that. What do you see as the current state of the market, in terms of energy? What does it look like? What are the problems with it that you want to solve?
So if you look at the deregulation of energy markets, Texas is probably the best example of successful deregulation. Your illusion Enron and what happened there in California is probably the worst example of what happened with deregulation. But what we see in Texas is we've actually had a system developed that's highly efficient, where you have competitive generation, you have competitive retailing, and we've also seen a lot of adoption of renewable resources. In Texas specifically, that's wind. On some days in Texas, wind production can make up 45% of the total energy production in the state. So it's actually worked out pretty well for Texas, and the biggest sort of point of inefficiency that still exists in the marketplace is kind of on the retailing side. So in Texas, about 85% of the households have access to something called competitive retailing. So they can choose from a number of companies who they want to actually purchase their electricity from. And these retailers end up charging customers about 100% markup over the actual cost of the electricity and the charges for distribution of that electricity. And so that 100% markup is the biggest inefficiency that still sort of remains in deregulated energy markets.
So, all right, when you're talking about retail, is that just me as a customer buying electricity from my local provider, or is this business retail? I mean, where is the focus here?
So when we talk about a retailer in Texas, a customer may think about a retailer as their utility. So the technical reference is a retail electricity provider, but what they do in the system is they're actually just sort of a financial intermediary. They don't typically produce energy. So they're not responsible for maintaining any sort of infrastructure or wires or transmission systems. They're only responsible for essentially buying energy out of these wholesale markets and then packaging it and selling to consumers. So, for example, if you're in Texas, your utility, as you might think of it, could be like a Reliant or a Green Mountain Energy, and those are what we refer to as the retailers.
Okay, so they don't seem to be bringing any value to the ecosystem yet. They're marking stuff up 100% in some cases.
Yeah, so what ends up happening is because they're not sort of bringing value and they're offering a non-differentiatable product in a competitive space, a lot of the money they spend and what that markup goes to can kind of be broken down into three different pieces. So one piece is amortizing bad debts of non-paying customers across the rest of the customer base, and that can cost the retailers about 25% of their margin or their markup. Another 25% of the margin or markup goes to paying for administrative costs, signing people up, kind of doing things with hedging energy prices and billing and administration. And then half of their money goes to marketing. So in Texas, because of this sort of non-differentiated product offering, the customer churn for the average retailer is about 30% of their customers will change per year. So they spend a tremendous amount of money marketing, just trying to acquire new customers to maintain their customer base at a consistent level from year to year.
Okay. So how are you going to make things more efficient? What's the solution to all this?
So if you look at what we're trying to do, is we're trying to use blockchain as a mechanism for settlement, such that the customers of Grid Plus, which is a retail electricity provider that we're starting in the state of Texas, and we're going to start taking customers in Q2 of next year. All of our customers will be able to pay for their electricity in real time, and the settlement mechanism for doing that will be a blockchain-based system. Because our customers can pay for their electricity in real time, we don't have to deal with this idea or costs associated with bad debt. So that we can pretty much eliminate that 25% out of the price stack. We also think that we can eliminate about half of the administrative costs. So right there, we've eliminated roughly 37% of that markup. Once we do that, we have a cost competitive advantage, and we then believe that will allow us to spend significantly less money on marketing. Overall, we anticipate that we can reduce the price of electricity for a residential customer in Texas by 35 to 40%.
So how will you allow people to pay in real time? That sounds like this huge savings. Right now, I guess people still have to come out and read the meter, right?
Yeah. So in tech, go ahead, Alex.
Yeah. So as far as like the Oracle data, that's still going to be the smart meter. That infrastructure is already set up. So we traditional utilities and retailers use really the same protocol that we will use. So basically, a house has a smart meter installed. It reads its net meter, so like the total amount that they've drawn in from the grid, or in some cases that they've put out into the grid. They just read the net influx or efflux of electricity over some time period. The smart meter then sends that data to the independent systems operator for the region. And in Texas, that entity is called ERCOT. It's a nonprofit. Basically, when a customer signs up for a utility, be it like Grid Plus or maybe someone else, that utility can query that ISO for the electricity that has been consumed via the ISO, and that electricity will have been sent, that reading will have been sent by the smart meter. The way our system works is that a customer would prepay for energy with something like a credit card, maybe a fiat like bank transfer, a wire transfer. Okay. And we would create a number of fiat tokens, so price stable USD tokens. We call them bolts in our system. And we would then send those to the customer's agent. That's a smart device that we manufacture, that we have shipped to them. It's basically an always-on cryptocurrency wallet with a secure enclave. It would then be able to pay for those bills in real time. So it has this cryptocurrency inside of associated with a private key that's stored inside of a secure enclave. It has a payment channel open with us, and that's using the Raiden network, which is built on top of Ethereum. And it's able to query us for that information every 15 minutes. So its smart meter will have pushed some data to the ISO. We will have pulled it. We will have multiplied that by the price of the electricity at that point in time, and then we will basically generate a bill for that customer. Their smart agent will query for that bill, get the amount, and then it will cryptographically sign a message with its private key, pledging to basically send us that money over the Raiden state channel. And that basically just happens every 15 minutes for as long as they are our customer.
Okay. What percentage of people in Texas, which sounds like where you're starting off, have a smart meter versus an old school meter? And how much does it cost to retrofit?
It's pretty close to 100%.
Yeah, in Texas, it's 100% penetration of smart meters. Texas is somewhat unique in that way. There are a number of smart meters in markets that have high penetration of smart meters. In the country now, there's about, I think, 40 to 50 million smart meters currently installed. But because Texas has 100% smart meter penetration, as well as having very sort of amiable regulations and a competitive deregulated market, that's the reason that we're initially starting in the Texas market.
Any, do people, all right, so, someone would set up a reserve and it would draw down that reserve of money as they use electricity. So you don't have people paying or being billed like every 15 minutes every day. That seems like it would drive people crazy.
Yeah, so from the customer standpoint, right, they're essentially putting money into the agent, and then that money is getting drawn down over time, rather than having the traditional model where they consume electricity on a credit basis and then settle at the end of the month. So the mechanism of the actual payments that are happening every 15 minutes are dealt with strictly by the agent. So the customer doesn't have to actually think about that. They just have to periodically sort of add funds, kind of like they would periodically pay their electricity bill.
Right. What about, I know it's probably not your bailiwick and stuff, but, if a customer doesn't pay, do they get cut off a lot faster than under the traditional model? Is there any downside to doing things this way from the customer's perspective or anyone else's perspective?
So there's consumer regulation protections and laws that have to be respected and for an electricity retailer in the market. And so in Texas, there's a requirement that the retailer gives 10 days notice prior to cutting off a customer. And so to deal with that, as well as essentially issues that may arise with dropping out in or intermittency in connectivity, the customers, when they sign up, will also have to sign up with a small deposit amount. So if the internet connectivity is lost or the agent goes down for some reason, or they just run out of funds and decide to stop paying their bills, the deposit will get drawn down upon, and that will give adequate amounts of time for us to then send a notice, give them 10 days, and be compliant with all the regulations without actually taking on a significant risk of a bad debt prior to shutting off electricity.
Yeah, because that turns this from a credit situation to a pay as you go and pay up front situation. So I see it'd be a big game changer for the the electric companies and for consumers and for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean that's kind of our stage one, so to speak, is we're essentially introducing this idea of pay as you go electricity to the U.S. markets. There's some interesting sort of features that we're also adding initially. So one of the things that a typical retail energy provider does is they have this idea of flat rate pricing. So when you buy electricity, you'll pay 11 cents in Texas, and it doesn't matter what time of day you're actually consuming, even though the wholesale markets or the actual price of electricity can vary widely throughout the day. You can see, at nighttime, it can be a penny, maybe 2 pennies. And then during peak times, it could go 4, 5, 6x that price. And so what that does, though, is it creates a system where although there are changes in supply and demand that are reflected in the price, the consumer isn't exposed to those, so they have no incentive to consume when there's an abundance or to curtail consumption when prices are high. But what the smart energy agent can do is it can act as a gateway to allow the customer to understand the prices, and then the agent can make decisions about consumption on the customer's behalf based off those prices. And so you're actually creating a responsive system to the market, which actually helps the grid become more stable and more efficient and get better utilization of existing infrastructure.
Interesting. Okay. Have you trialed this yet? Is it in action in Texas or anywhere? Are customers using it yet?
Alex, you want to take that one?
Yeah. So we ran a POC as part of a client engagement earlier this year. That was a previous iteration relative to what we have now. So what we want to do now, that was a very limited trial, and it was kind of in a different scope than this. We are working on we have like a demo that can be sort of done virtually, but we haven't deployed any hardware yet. We're looking to do that in Q2 when we sign up our first customers as part of our Texas utility. So that's looking like our first kind of deployment date, and we want to target somewhere around 5,000 customers for that.
Oh, cool.
So
it'd be interesting to see what behaviors are good.
Yeah, so to kind of elaborate on that a little bit more, so we've demonstrated a lot of the software sort of capabilities of the system in a sort of the proof of concept sort of limited scale environment. In terms of actually being able to do it on a broad scale and with open market participation, we have to go through the process of essentially registering and getting approval as a retail electricity provider in the state of Texas. And then we also are in the process of taking essentially what is prototype hardware and creating production hardware, which we can actually deploy at scale. So those two things are in the process of happening, and those should be done, like Alex said, by Q2 of next year.
What about, if people want to sell electricity back to the grid, or they want to do a local grid in their area? Does your system accommodate any of that stuff, or is that kind of totally separate?
Yeah, so we do. One thing that kind of sets us apart from a lot of other projects in the blockchain space that are doing energy is that we really believe in using the existing grid. So this is this really reliable network, at least in the U.S., that doesn't go down a lot. There is a lot of strain on it, but we are all connected to it, and it's this really, really large piece of infrastructure that is for the most part reliable. So what we want to do is really augment that grid with additional resources that can kind of boost the capacity of it over time. So what we're designing our system to do is, by opening these markets like Karl was talking about, by opening the pricing, we think that this will incentivize people to purchase solar panels and batteries. And that comes from the fact that the open pricing is sort of the same. It's still exposed to market fluctuations on the production side. So when you hook up a solar panel to your house, the meter doesn't need to really register that as a solar panel per se. All the net meter really sees is that more power is flowing out of your house and into the grid. So if you, over a 15-minute period of time, produce more power from like your solar panel than you consume, that means your net meter is going to read like a positive value. And that means that you're going to actually get paid for that 15-minute period rather than having to pay for electricity. So all this really comes down to is accounting, and Grid Plus is kind of like the global accounting layer. So we want to be basically the bridge between this future that we see of distributed energy resources as kind of their own local grid, sort of like local production. We want to be the bridge between that and the old world of electricity retailing and things like that. So what we want to sort of facilitate in the long term is peer-to-peer transfers. So if, for example, Alice produces 5 kilowatt hours of power, and then Bob consumes that 5 kilowatt hours of power, if Alice is offering a better rate for that power than we are as a provider, on our system, Bob will be able to purchase that directly from Alice. And again, that's really where blockchain comes into play. That's where you kind of need something like the Raiden network on Ethereum to facilitate that payment layer. Over time, we think that the grid will localize for the most part. Like the shift of generation will go away from the larger upstream, coal-fired power plants. I don't think. Well, I don't know that it will ever completely disappear, but I think a lot of that supply will be shifted to local producers because they don't have to move power over long distances. And it's in many cases cheaper on a per unit basis to produce it locally.
Gotcha, great. So, all right, the last couple of questions. This sounds like it'd be a really great system once it gets going, and I'm sure instead of having to manually go and look for the cheapest power or for inefficiencies in the system, it'll just automatically do that. Have a matching network, for buyers and sellers of power locally. What do you guys have on your roadmap for the next 6 months or a year? What's coming and what are some milestones? Yeah,
so I think we are going to be pretty focused on getting this first pilot out there in Texas and sort of getting to 5,000 customers so that we have a small amount of scale and really proving out this model that this works. We're also working on partnerships with other utilities. We have one that will probably be announced pretty shortly here. And the idea there is that we want to be able to license this software to utilities in other regions where we can't operate. So Karl talked about Texas being a deregulated market. This means essentially that the retailer cannot own the lines of distribution. In a lot of cases, in a lot of states in the U.S. and really throughout the world, you don't see that. You have these kind of government-sanctioned monopolies. And we would never be able to operate there unless like a lot of legislation was changed. So we want to be able to work with utilities that already operate there, who see a benefit in sort of the automation that our software provides and in the cost cutting that our software provides. And we want to be able to bring Grid Plus to those areas as well.
That's great. All right. Well, so last question, how can people get in touch with you if they want to talk about collaborating and finding out more about what you guys do?
Yeah, go to gridplus.io, join our Slack, and then find either myself, Karl, or Mark D'Agostino on the Slack there, and then just give us a holler.
All right, well, that's great. Well, guys, thanks for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yep, thanks for having us.
The Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Blockchain Super Conference is coming to Dallas, Texas, February 16, 17, and 18 in 2018. If you know of a better way to get the latest insider knowledge about crypto, to hear directly from the top minds in this field, to interact personally with 800 fellow crypto lovers, hodlers, investors, miners, traders, developers, and founders, then I'd like to hear about it. If you don't, then you don't want to miss out. Register today for the Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Blockchain Super Conference. Go to bitcoinsuperconference.com and register today as a super early bird to get the lowest rates on tickets and hotel rooms. That's bitcoinsuperconference.com.
You have been listening to Almost Here, Around the Corner Future Technology podcast with Richard Jacobs. Subscribe to this podcast, post a review to discover more future technologies that are poised to transform our lives for better or worse, such as Bitcoin, artificial intelligence, 3D printing, blockchain, virtual reality, and more.